There are sports rants, and then there are moments that completely rewrite careers and reshape narratives. And this morning, Stephen A. Smith didn't just rant, he went nuclear. On live national television, during an unscripted 27-minute segment that producers had to extend on the fly, Stephen A. locked his sights on one man, Dillon Gabriel. And what he unleashed wasn't commentary, it was annihilation. This wasn't your typical hot take session, where Stephen A. yells about MVP races or coaching decisions. No, this was strategic, cutting, months in the making demolition. And Dillon Gabriel? He walked into the buzzsaw voluntarily, already on the wrong side of the Cleveland Browns quarterback revolution. Here's how it happened. For weeks, Cleveland had been buzzing. Training camp was making throws that had even veterans whispering, "Damn, this kid is different." Jerseys were flying off shelves. Season tickets, record highs. National cameras were suddenly circling Cleveland, not in mockery, but in genuine anticipation. And in the middle of all this hype stood Dillon Gabriel, not as the leader, not as the face of the franchise, but as the backup, the forgotten man. So on Monday night, Gabriel's camp launched a desperate play. Anonymous leaks started hitting local Cleveland outlets. Reporters wrote that some in the coaching staff had concerns about Sanders' readiness. Others whispered about preferential treatment because of his name, his father, and his marketability. By Tuesday morning, the fingerprints were obvious. A coordinated campaign designed to scrap the normal outline of the show. And for nearly half an hour, he dismantled Gabriel piece by piece. His attitude, his behavior, his stats, even his intelligence. Producers said the studio went silent. No camera operators moving, no assistants shuffling papers. They all knew this segment was legendary television in the making. Dillon Gabriel has completely lost his mind, Stephen A. began, his voice rising with that unmistakable cadence. If he thinks he can disrespect Shedeur Sanders and this Cleveland Browns organization without consequences, he's about to learn today. From that moment on, Gabriel wasn't just being criticized, he was being exposed. And the timing couldn't have been worse. The Browns were celebrating their most successful camp in decades. Jimmy Haslam, the notoriously hands-off owner, was suddenly smiling through practices. National optimism around the Cleveland Browns was real for once. Sanders wasn't just a quarterback, he was a movement. Then Gabriel's camp dropped their negativity bomb. And Stephen A. Smith, he detonated it right back in their face. The rest of the segment was brutal. The tantrums, the back-channel whining, the undermining of teammates, all of it dragged into the spotlight. Smith called it pathetic. He called it loser behavior. And he made it crystal clear. Dillon Gabriel had burned his reputation in Cleveland to the ground. Fans online trended #StephenA and #GabrielExposed within minutes. Teammates were texting reporters lines like, "He's right, Sanders is the guy." And that was just day one. Because for Dillon Gabriel, this wasn't the beginning of a comeback story. This was the beginning of a week-long destruction, one that would spiral beyond Cleveland, beyond football, and into uncharted territory. And make no mistake, when Stephen A. Smith decides to end your career, you don't walk away, you crawl. To understand why Stephen A. Smith erupted with such fury, you have to rewind 48 hours, back to the spark that lit this firestorm. Because this wasn't just Stephen A. deciding to flip on Dillon Gabriel out of nowhere. No, this was the moment Gabriel made the worst professional mistake of his career, trying to beat Shedeur Sanders in the court of public opinion. On Monday evening, multiple Cleveland sports outlets, papers, radio shows, some blogs trying to climb in the algorithm, all mysteriously carried the same story. Anonymous sources within the organization whispering that Shedeur Sanders wasn't really ready. that his ascension to QB1 status was being rushed by head coach Kevin Stefanski. That certain people believe Shedeur was being treated differently just because he was Dion's son and not just another rookie fighting for reps. The timing was suspicious, the tone identical across multiple outlets, and the effect was obvious. They were trying to seed doubt. This wasn't investigative journalism. This was PR spin masquerading as reporting, and everyone can see the fingerprints. The problem? The fingerprints pointed straight back to Dillon Gabriel's camp. Insiders quickly pieced it together. The leaks weren't coming from coaches. In fact, many of them were shocked to see their alleged quotes in the papers. They weren't coming from neutral staffers either. The rhythm, the synchronization across outlets, screamed of a coordinated media blitz. It was Crisis Management 101. Take control of the narrative, muddy the waters, and give your client a lifeline in the public arena. But Cleveland isn't some media backwater anymore, and Stephen A. Smith isn't some regional radio caller you can outmaneuver. When Tuesday morning rolled around and the First Take cameras went live, Stephen A. walked into the studio already loaded for war. His producers later admitted he'd thrown his notes in the trash. He saw those leaks, and he wasn't about to entertain them. "Oh, really?" he began, voice rising. "Now we got anonymous sources trying to tell us Shedeur Sanders ain't ready? That he's only here because of his daddy? Please, don't insult my intelligence, and don't insult the public's intelligence." And then he dropped the hammer. Dillon Gabriel thinks we're all stupid. He thinks Browns fans are gullible. He thinks the media is blind. Brother, please, I didn't just fall off the turnip truck yesterday. With that one line, Gabriel's entire PR strategy imploded. For Stephen A., this was about more than just football. It was about respecting the audience, and he made it crystal clear. Gabriel's camp had underestimated both the fans' ability to smell BS and his own ability to go for the throat. In less than 5 minutes of live television, he turned what Gabriel believed would be a whisper campaign into national humiliation. From then on, every conversation was no longer about whether Shedeur was ready. It was about how reckless Gabriel had been to try and smear him, and how badly it backfired. And by the time Stephen A. was done that morning, it was clear. This wasn't just going to be one fiery segment. This was going to be a week-long demolition. The moment Stephen A. Smith finished that opening barrage, the fallout began. And it was instantaneous, loud, and irreversible. First came the social media earthquake. By the time the first commercial break aired, hashtags like Stephen A. and Gabriel Exposed were already trending nationwide. Clips of Stephen A. pointing into the camera, practically shaking with anger, flooded Twitter and TikTok. Someone spliced his "brother, please, I didn't just fall off the turnip truck" line into a meme with Gabriel's preseason interceptions, and it racked up millions of views overnight. Browns fans, who are usually split down the middle on every issue from play calling to parking lot traffic, suddenly found themselves united. For once, they weren't fighting each other on radio. They were all pointing fingers at the same target, Dillon Gabriel. Inside Berea, word spread even faster. Players were texting each other clips before practice even wrapped. According to multiple insiders, several veterans walked right up to Shedeur Sanders and told him, point blank, "Don't worry about the noise. We got your back." Offensive linemen who had been publicly neutral suddenly began leaning in, echoing their support for QB1. Sanders hadn't said a word, but the locker room was rallying behind him regardless. Meanwhile, ownership wasn't quiet. Sources close to Jimmy Haslam described him as furious after learning of Gabriel's behind-the-scenes media games. Haslam isn't known for dramatic day-to-day involvement in football operations, but this was different. He reportedly pulled Gabriel into an emergency meeting the next morning. Witness accounts suggest it wasn't long and it wasn't polite. The message? You're not the franchise. Sanders is. You either support this team's future or you can find work elsewhere. Fans picked up on the shift immediately. Cleveland talk radio hosts who had pushed Gabriel's anonymous leaks just 24 hours earlier pivoted awkwardly. Suddenly, the narrative was about locker room leadership and chemistry. Local TV stations led with stories about Sanders' jersey sales breaking franchise records rather than Gabriel's complaints. And beyond Cleveland, the national media ran wild. ESPN replayed Stephen A's eruption 7 times before lunch. Fox and NFL Network scrambled to generate counter-hype, but couldn't escape the gravitational pull of the rant. Analysts started admitting on air what had been whispered in hallways. Shedeur wasn't just QB1 of the Browns. He was tapping into something cultural. For Dillon Gabriel, the nightmare deepened. He'd expected his PR push to buy time and sympathy. Instead, it lit a fuse that blew up in his own face. He hadn't just lost the locker room. He lost the city. The owner was livid. The media had turned. The fans had picked their side. And even his teammates had begun quietly distancing themselves. By the end of that day, one thing had become painfully obvious. Stephen A's rant wasn't an isolated explosion. It was the opening shot in what would become a complete career demolition. If the Tuesday rant was raw emotion, fire, passion, verbal haymakers, then Wednesday morning was surgical. Stephen A. Smith came armed with data, and Dillon Gabriel's fragile campaign to frame himself as a victim didn't last 5 minutes under the weight of cold, hard numbers. Let's get something straight. Stephen A. If Gabriel wants to drag this into a numbers conversation, then we can talk numbers. And talk numbers he did. Smith started with the most basic measure, completion percentage. Sanders had been hitting nearly 68% of his throws in camp, and, crucially, doing so against Cleveland's first-team defense. Gabriel, 54%, and most of that against backups. The point landed with a bang. Next came touchdown to interception ratio. Sanders, 17 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Gabriel, 9 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Stephen A. didn't even have to editorialize. He just stared into the camera and let the silence marinate before saying, but somehow, long pause. Gabriel deserves equal consideration? Then came yards per attempt and quarterback rating. Sanders ranked near the top across preseason scrimmages and joint practices, carving up secondaries with aggressive downfield play. Gabriel? Bottom third metrics by comparison. The hammer fell hardest with Smith's analysis of mobility and leadership intangibles. Sanders' ability to extend plays, roll outside the pocket, and still maintain accuracy had receivers and defenders buzzing all camp. Gabriel stayed frozen in the pocket, predictable, and hobbled by decision-making delays. Teammates were privately describing him as hesitant and flat. In the NFL, hesitation equals death, and Smith knew his audience understood that. This ain't about opinions anymore, Stephen A. barked, holding up the folder. This is about facts, completion percentage, turnovers, efficiency, red zone execution, leadership reports. Who do they favor? Shedeur Sanders across the board. Tweets flew across the timeline spamming charts, graphics, and memes. Math don't lie quickly became the trending slogan of the day. Even skeptics in the national press admitted that Gabriel's supposed fairness campaign looked ridiculous when lined up against the actual football results. And here's where Smith really twisted the knife. He framed Gabriel's manipulation as not just weak, but insulting to the intelligence of fans. Do you think Browns fans haven't been watching? You think those receivers and linemen don't know what just happened in camp? You think I've been covering this lead for decades and can't see who's balling and who's not? By now, Gabriel wasn't fighting just perception. He was fighting mathematics. And as every analyst knows, statistics are merciless. They don't bend for PR campaigns. They don't care about draft order or pedigrees. Stats tell the truth. And Stephen A. had just broadcast those truths to millions. The battle was over. Not because of hype, but because the evidence had crushed Gabriel's credibility. By the end of Stephen A.'s Wednesday segment, the question wasn't whether Shedeur Sanders was QB1. The question was how soon Gabriel would be out of Cleveland entirely. By midweek, Dillon Gabriel could have chosen silence. He could have regrouped, embraced his backup role, and started repairing relationships inside the locker room. He could have lived to fight another day. Instead, he pressed the self-destruct button. Rather than cooling off after Stephen A.'s first demolition and the wave of negative fan reaction, Gabriel's camp doubled down. More anonymous sources popped up across Cleveland sports media. Once again, questioning Shedeur Sanders' readiness and planting suggestions that coaches were sacrificing wins for marketing appeal. If the first leaks looked suspicious, the follow-ups looked desperate, and everyone knew exactly where they were coming from. Stephen A. smelled the blood in the water immediately. When First Take went live Thursday morning, he did something rare. He smirked before the cameras even rolled. "Now, Dillon Gabriel wants to question my information?" he said, leaning into the camera like he was scolding a child. "Brother, I've been covering professional football since before you were throwing spirals in high school. My sources aren't interns sitting on Twitter. My sources are Hall of Fame players, championship coaches, and front office executives across 32 organizations." But sure, the studio lost it. Analysts at the desk didn't even bother to push back. The audience gasped. The monologue wasn't just scathing, it was humiliating. By repackaging Gabriel's pushback into arrogance, Stephen A. flipped public perception even harder. Now Gabriel wasn't only seen as insecure, he was seen as delusional. But here's where things got especially brutal. Stephen A. reframed Gabriel's very decision to leak against Sanders as a test of character. While Sanders had stayed quiet, continued leading in the locker room, and avoided media fireworks, Gabriel was orchestrating smear campaigns, crying to local reporters, and throwing shade at his own teammates. And the league noticed. One AFC executive was quoted anonymously after that Thursday segment. "No coach wants to deal with a guy who can't handle competition and immediately runs to the media." Not when your QB2 is supposed to be the glue guy, not a distraction. Inside Cleveland's locker room, the shift became irreversible. Teammates, who had once been polite or neutral toward Gabriel, now openly kept their distance. Younger players whispered about him being poison. Offensive linemen, the people tasked with protecting him on the field, reportedly told coaches in confidence they'd lost all respect for him. And Gabriel himself? He fanned the flames further. Instead of apologizing or walking back the comments, his agent released statements suggesting Stephen A. had incomplete information about the situation. Predictably, this only gave Stephen A. more ammo for his Thursday encore demolition. At this point, the battle wasn't about football at all. It was about credibility, maturity, and survival. Sanders looked like a future face of the NFL, and the more Gabriel spoke, the worse it got. By the end of Thursday's First Take, one thing was crystal clear. Dillon Gabriel wasn't just losing a quarterback competition, he was losing his career in real time. By Friday morning, the battle lines weren't blurry anymore. The locker room had picked a side. So had the fans. And spoiler alert, it wasn't Dillon Gabriel. Inside Berea, the shift was impossible to miss. Teammates who had once politely split their loyalty began making their stance obvious. Offensive linemen stopped hiding their opinions and started speaking up. Protecting Sanders just hits different. You feel like plays matter when he's back there. Receivers who used to quietly juggle reps with both quarterbacks began lobbying coaches for more time with Shedeur. Defensive players, who are often the most skeptical in these kinds of situations, admitted privately that practices were sharper, more competitive, and more cohesive when Sanders led the huddle. Sanders hadn't asked for anyone to rally around him. He hadn't orchestrated a media game. But his attitude, quiet, professional, and laser-focused, combined with consistent play, had turned him into the natural gravitational force of a team. By contrast, Gabriel's constant negative energy and media leaks sucked all the oxygen out of the room. So while Gabriel still had a locker inside the building, by midweek, he no longer had the locker room. And then came the fans. Cleveland, notorious for its split nature when it comes to their quarterbacks, achieved a rare moment of unity. Fans started returning Gabriel's merchandise to team stores in droves, demanding store credit and opting for Sanders jerseys instead. Social media became a digital bonfire. Hashtags like #Shedeur era and #WeRideWith5 gained millions of impressions. Fans flooded radio shows and podcasts, not calling to debate who should start, but to celebrate Sanders as the clear face of the franchise. Even lifelong skeptics admitted something felt different. One caller famously said, "For the first time in 20 years, I'm not embarrassed to call myself a Browns fan." Meanwhile, Gabriel's mentions became toxic. Memes comparing his fairness campaign to playground whining went viral. Clips of him missing easy throws in preseason were set to Stephen A's rant audio and shared across TikTok, turning his struggles into comedy content. For a city that lives and dies by accountability, Gabriel had become the symbol of everything wrong with the Me First era. And here's the kicker. Those same fans who had been burning Browns jerseys in protest just a season ago were now lining up outside stadium stores like it was Black Friday. Sanders wasn't just revitalizing the football team. He was restoring civic pride. By the end of that week, the clearest sign of all emerged. When Sanders jogged onto the practice field, veterans cheered, and the crowd outside training camp roared. When Gabriel took snaps later in drills, crickets. The team's loyalty and the city's devotion were decided. Dillon Gabriel wasn't just the backup quarterback anymore. He was the outsider. By the time the weekend hit, Dillon Gabriel's situation wasn't just unstable. It was scorched earth. Stephen A. Smith wasn't done. Not even close. After 3 straight days of blistering rants and decisive statistical takedowns, most figured Smith would pivot to another story. He didn't. Instead, he rolled into Friday with the professional equivalent of a flamethrower. ESPN promoted the segment as the Friday finale, but fans started calling it what it truly was: Gabriel Destruction Week. This time, Stephen A. didn't open with emotion. He started slow, methodical. "Let's talk legacy," he said calmly. "Let's talk what separates quarterbacks who lead franchises from the ones who get their reps pulled in Week 8. Then came the files. Pages of scouting notes, college tape breakdowns, draft red flags, leadership concerns, character grades, things that had always existed but had been politely ignored until now. Gabriel's numbers at the collegiate level were dissected live. Touchdown to interception ratio, inconsistent. Fourth quarter performance, below average. This man was passed over by multiple NFL teams, Stephen A. said, because everyone saw who he was, except Dillon Gabriel. What followed next cemented the segment in ESPN history. 43 uninterrupted minutes, no commercial breaks, no reaction panel. Just Stephen A. systematically dismantling Gabriel's career, attitude, decisions, and future in front of millions. Then came the closing line, delivered with the coldness of a seasoned executioner. "Let me be real clear. Dillon Gabriel is not a quarterback. He's a distraction, a liability, and I wouldn't let him lead my scout team, let alone my locker room." And that was it. The clip went supernova, trending worldwide before noon, shared by athletes, entertainers, even politicians. TikTok edits, Twitter memes, YouTube reactions. Celebrities posted clips of themselves watching the rant live. Inside NFL front offices, the mood shifted from curiosity to concern. One AFC executive put it bluntly, Stephen A. just made Gabriel radioactive. Even Rosenhaus, Gabriel's agent, went radio silent for the first time in a week. Calls went unanswered, media spots canceled, Photoshop requests for updated QB1 graphics deleted. Meanwhile, Stephen A. was still going. Monday's rant was fire, but Friday was the funeral. Executives, teammates, fans, even rival players understood the message loud and clear. Dillon Gabriel versus Shedeur Sanders wasn't just a depth chart debate. It had become a full-blown reputation war. And by the end of that nuclear weekend, there was only one survivor. Hint? He wears number 5. While Dillon Gabriel's public image was falling apart in real time, Shedeur Sanders was doing something far more dangerous to his critics. Nothing. No tweets, no interviews, no subtweets, no shade. Just silence and film study. While Gabriel's team flooded the media with half-baked narratives and Stephen A. Smith shredded them piece by piece, Sanders kept his head down, locked into film sessions, showing up early to training, staying late with the receivers, and earning even more respect from coaches, teammates, and media who were all waiting to see if he would crack under the pressure. He didn't. And that's why this whole saga didn't just bury Gabriel. It elevated Shedeur. One source inside the Browns facility said it best. It was like watching a rookie walk through a media minefield without flinching. That wasn't accidental. That was leadership. Instead of punching back, Sanders took a route most young players don't. He focused on preparation and leaned into the moment with genuine maturity. He asked veterans for advice. He watched film instead of social media. He treated the controversy as white noise, not fuel for a viral post. But here's where it gets even more impressive. Behind the scenes, Shedeur actually reached out to Gabriel directly. Multiple teammates confirmed it. "I just want you to know I respect your game," Sanders allegedly wrote in a private message. "Hope we can still push each other to get better." That one message, it spread like wildfire inside the locker room, without Shedeur ever saying a word publicly. Players who were still on the fence, that moment turned them. "He didn't have to do that," said one veteran lineman. And the fact that he did, with the spotlight on him, with all the cameras waiting, it told us exactly who QB1 really is. Cleveland media, especially those who had accidentally bought into Gabriel's original leaks, started redirecting their coverage. Nobody wanted to be on the wrong side of history now. Articles praising Sanders' maturity beyond his years started circulating. Influencers and analysts began comparing his poise to that of established vets. More importantly, his teammates didn't just respect the game. They started trusting the man. Because poise under pressure isn't built in highlight clips. It's revealed in how a player reacts when the whole world is watching, waiting for a misstep. Gabriel talked. Gabriel leaked. Gabriel scrambled to control the moment, and Shedeur led. He didn't need the cameras, he didn't need the hashtags, he just needed the ball. And now, the entire building in Cleveland knows the right guy has it. Just when it seemed like Dillon Gabriel's reputation couldn't take any more damage, the bombshell dropped. At first, people thought his media leaks were just sloppy, amateur moves from a frustrated Dillon. Displaced backup. But what was uncovered next proved it wasn't just messy, it was orchestrated. And it nearly took down the integrity of the Browns franchise in the process. Investigative reporters dug deeper, and what they unearthed felt less like a quarterback controversy and more like a political scandal. Anonymous sourcing? Scripted. Coordinated leaks? Confirmed. Fake burner accounts? Thousands of them, according to multiple reports. Gabriel's camp had hired an LA-based PR agency specializing in reputation repair. the kind used by celebrities during cheating scandals, athletes during suspension hearings, and billionaires with image problems. The goal was clear: create a grassroots-style campaign that undermined Shedeur Sanders' rise, cast doubt on his readiness, and manufactured sympathy for Gabriel as a mistreated underdog. But here's the agency reportedly created thousands of fake Twitter accounts, programmed bots, and blasted out anti-Sanders rhetoric at scale. Comments flooding Brown's posts with "Give Gabriel a real shot" or "Shedeur's a media plant" were traced to IP farms controlled by the agency. They even pitched national sports blogs stories full of cherry-picked stats to make Gabriel look better. And they didn't stop there. Private communications allegedly show Gabriel's reps offering incentives to friendly media personalities to publish stories amplifying these narratives. Some even floated financial rewards for exclusive interviews or favorable on-air mentions. The entire thing collapsed when a FOIA-based request uncovered emails directly linking the PR firm to these campaigns. Once ESPN got wind of it, Stephen A. didn't hold back. "This ain't about football anymore," he said live on Monday. "This is about trying to rig the media." Dillon Gabriel's team tried to manipulate the entire American sports landscape because they knew they couldn't win on talent. And now that we caught them, game over. The impact was brutal and fast. The NFL began internal investigations. The Browns launched a full review of player media activity. Even the FBI reportedly stepped in due to potential use of foreign-based bot networks and digital fraud. What started as a quarterback battle had evolved into a digital ethics scandal, and Gabriel was at the center of it. Meanwhile, Shedeur Sanders continued his quiet rise, letting the truth play out in front of the world. No spin, no manipulation, just football. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. While Gabriel's story became one of ego, sabotage, and desperate missteps, Shedeur's became one of quiet confidence, authenticity, and earned trust. In the biggest media war the NFL had seen in years, only one side fought with facts, and they won. What started as an athlete trying to protect his job turned into a national conversation about media ethics, digital manipulation, and how influence works in the modern world. Because once Dillon Gabriel's PR campaign was fully exposed, the burner accounts, the paid placements, the foreign bot farms, the fallout extended far beyond the NFL. Suddenly, this wasn't just a football story. This was a media manipulation case study being discussed in business schools, political forums, and cybersecurity roundtables. The fact that one disgruntled player's camp had weaponized fake narratives to sabotage a teammate wasn't just a bad look. It was a cultural red flag. Within days, media watchdog groups demanded accountability. Major sports networks, including ESPN, updated their anonymous sourcing policies. Several prominent journalists who had run with Gabriel's anonymous talking points were forced to issue corrections. Some quietly scrubbed their stories entirely. Congress took notice next. Capitol Hill staffers opened inquiries into whether foreign-based bot networks violated misinformation laws. The idea that one player's manipulation campaign could mimic election interference tactics raised national security questions. It got serious, fast. Stephen A. Smith was even called to testify in a hearing. His 15-minute opening statement about media transparency and narrative warfare became viral in itself. He warned legislators, "If you don't protect the truth in sports, you won't be able to protect it anywhere else either." Tech companies joined the fight. Twitter, Meta, and Google began implementing real-time detection tools for identifying artificial narrative spikes. The Gabriel scandal helped fast-track new AI filters for spam detection, narrative farming, and political-style influence tactics on sports content. New internal teams were built to review engineered trending topics. Business schools updated their ethics curriculum. Gabriel's story became the modern cautionary tale of brand sabotage and the psychological cost of chasing relevance at any cost. Harvard Business Review ran a piece titled, "The Gabriel Effect: When Personal Branding Becomes Self-Destruction." High school football programs even picked up on it. Coaches started including sessions. Players caught engaging in digital manipulation could now face suspensions or fines, much like PED violations. In a world already tangled in misinformation, Gabriel's attempt to rewrite the quarterback hierarchy became a case study in everything wrong with unchecked spin, and everything right with authentic leadership. While Gabriel's name now appears in textbooks under reputation collapse, Shedeur's appears under franchise ID. He set fire to an entire strategy that's been growing in the background of every sports league for years. Fabricated narratives, strategic leaks, burner campaigns, attention-chasing agents, and media manipulation dressed up as anonymous insight. And the best part? He beat it with truth. While Dillon Gabriel tried to engineer sympathy, Stephen A. buried it beneath facts. While Gabriel's camp planted doubts, Stephen A. forced clarity. And while others debated, hesitated, and spin-cycled the issue, Stephen A. stepped in and made the call Cleveland was too cautious to say out loud. Shedeur Sanders is the franchise. Gabriel is the distraction. End of story. That single message gave the team clarity. It gave fans conviction. It gave national media their new headline. And it gave Sanders the breathing room to simply be great. What followed? A full-scale reputation collapse for Gabriel, complete with a trade, a lost locker room, and a permanent mark on his NFL profile. And for Sanders, a complete takeover. QB1, franchise face, national darling. But here's the deeper truth. This wasn't about one quarterback replacing another. This was about leaders replacing manipulators, about professionalism replacing politics, about sports media finally acting like gatekeepers of truth, not megaphones for whoever yells loudest behind closed doors. Stephen A. proves something critics of modern sports media have been saying for years, that platforms can be used responsibly. They can facilitate not just outrage, but accountability. And sometimes a microphone in the right hands is just as powerful as a helmet on the right head. What Gabriel attempted was a tactical play, but the game has changed. Player branding isn't just about Instagram engagement or whittle soundbites. It's about character. And when push came to shove, he didn't just lose the battle for QB1. He lost the trust that makes any future possible. Meanwhile, Sanders didn't fight with words. He fought with maturity, silence, work ethic, and grace. And the entire world saw the difference. So yes, Stephen A. won the debate, but more than that, he changed the standard. From this moment forward, every quarterback that leaks stories will be measured against Dillon Gabriel, and everyone that rises quietly, gracefully, and unshakably will be compared to Shedeur Sanders.